So good morning. My name is Jeffrey Jure. I'm UMass Extension. Welcome to the program this morning. We have my colleague here, Mr. Menu, who is works with me and the greenhouse program. So our first presentation this morning is actually coming through the video because Rick Yates, who is vice president this morning, was not able to make it out here. So he's coming through by video. And hopefully things will work out fine. and so Rick Yates is the manager for technical service for Griffin's greenhouse supplies. So Rick, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. So he's not able to show his image. So I think most of you know Rick. And so let's welcome Rick this morning through video. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I bring greetings to you this morning from the winter wonderland of Morgantown, Pennsylvania. I heard you mention the weather headed your way. I can tell you it's here, and you can thank us for sending it to you later on. We're going to spend a good bit of time talking about new pesticides today. In the beginning, I'm going to take a short detour to talk about biocontrols and a little bit about the influence of crop nutrition on insect and disease control. I was asked to leave some time for questions, and I want to work really hard to make sure that happens. So if you're following along with your handouts, you might find a couple of slides I'm skipping. I have them at the end. If we have time, I'll circle back to them, but I want to make sure we have some time for questions. We always say when it comes to pesticide talks that we have more disclaimers than a used car salesman. Unfortunately, some of these things are really important. A couple of things I want to stress is that, of course, the label is the law. And in a lot of cases, I'll be talking about pesticides that are newly registered or have not yet been released. So even though I'm including snippets from the label, it's always the job of the grower to confirm that with the label when you get it in your possession. Over the last few years, something we've done at all the Griffin Expos is to talk about some of the new chemistry that is on the market. And I think sometimes it's good to go back and take a look at just how well those products actually fared. When we first bring these products to you, we're often working off of information provided to us by the manufacturers and not a whole lot of supporting data past that. So we're doing the best we can, but until the growers get out there and use it, we don't always know. So I'm going to start off by reviewing some of the products that we were talking about last year and let you know how our grower, anecdotally, the growers are telling us they worked. Aspen is the case where, honestly, the fungicide performed better than the data that we were given in advance. We were led to believe this would be a very good preventative, but not a good knockdown of botrytis. And the truth is, it's a very quick knockdown, and it does provide residual control as well. One of the nice features of it is excellent plant and bloom safety. We had growers use it throughout the spring season last year with great results, and not a single report of phytotoxicity. In fact, Ann Chase mentioned in one of her newsletters recently that she considers Aspen to be the new standard for botrytis control. So that's high praise. We'll talk about Aspen a little bit more later on. Botry-Stop is a unique product. It's actually a fungal-based botryticide. It is based on a beneficial fungus called Ulicaladium. And the way that it works, it colonizes senescing tissue in the greenhouse, and it actually outcompetes botrytis for the nutrients that would be available through that senescing tissue. And when we were first introduced to it, my thought was that it might be good as a complement to a botrytis program, but it would not work standalone. We need to add more of a knockdown product. Well, for growers that stayed on the program and used it on a regular basis, they found it was quite effective and really was able to be used standalone. The downsides to Botry-Stop are the packaging. It comes in a very large container, and because the product has a short shelf life, some of our small to medium-sized growers really didn't feel like they could get involved with it. I'm hoping that we'll see a smaller package size in years to come. Altis was introduced as a neonic replacement in a lot of ways. It's in the same family tree as the neonics, but it does have a distinctly different code. Basically, it carries some of the good characteristics of the neonicotinoids, but with much improved bee safety, which is obviously really important to us. In terms of how well Altus has worked for growers, it's been an exceptional aphid product. Even at the lowest label rates, it'll kill aphids within 24 hours and maintain control for 3 weeks or longer. Also, very good results on leafhoppers and mealybugs. In terms of whiteflies, the jury's still out for us a little bit. We are getting mixed results. It certainly doesn't seem to be quite as strong as products such as Safari and Rycar in terms of whiteflies. I think the biggest thing I would want to mention is that the way that the drench label was written, it does not allow the properly high rate of Altus that is needed to give good results from a drench. And we're very concerned about sublethal doses if it's used according to the way the label's written now. So GGS Pro continues to maintain this product should only be used as a foliar spray. And when the drench label is fixed, we'll change our tune. Also, another nice feature of Altus is it's labeled for a wide variety of vegetable transplants. And there's 4 vegetables that can be used all the way up to harvest on, which has been a real benefit to our greenhouse vegetable growers. Zeo was a swing and a miss. This was a biological fungicide based on Pseudomonas. It looked very promising, including some curative activity and be able to use as a spray or a drench, but production problems have kept it off the board so far, and actually there's no real certain time when Zeo will hit the market. So that was one that didn't pan out the way that we had hoped. Mural is a very broad spectrum fungicide. It's a combination of 2 modes of action, your strobilurons as well as mode of action 7, which includes a good knockdown to it. Our growers have adopted it widely and think very highly of it. Plant safety is excellent. It can be used as a spray or a drench depending on the disease you're going after. Mural is also labeled for vegetable transplants, many of them. Well, in many ways, Syngenta has done a great job for us, including the fact that it can be fogged, and most of our strobilurons are not foggable. Last but not least, from Syngenta is Segovus. Segovus is the best product for downy mildew and Phytophthora that I have ever seen, not only because it's a quick knockdown and it's very thorough, but the length of control is significant as well. Growers, there were some trials done in Florida where in patients downy mildew is a persistent problem throughout the winter season down there, and they got up to 9 weeks of control in some of the trials. So this is a highly effective product. So before we get into some of the newer pesticides for this year, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about biocontrols. GGS Pro and Griffin is very much involved in helping growers with biocontrol programs. And even though our emphasis today is primarily on new pesticides, I wanted to just kind of bring this up. And for some of you that have not tried biocontrols or maybe had a bad experience and kind of walked away from it earlier on, it might be time to reconsider. And there's a lot of good reasons for us to integrate biocontrols into our insect and disease control. Resistance to the current stall of chemistry is significant, and we are losing more active ingredients to loss of registration or resistance than we're getting new active ingredients coming in the other side of the funnel. And we believe that biocontrols are going to continue to play an increasingly large role in our insect and mite control going forward. Some of the things that have improved the cost effectiveness and also the efficacy of biocontrols is increased use of banker plants. Banker plants are not new. They've been around probably for 100 years or more, but the techniques have been refined and are really allowing growers to meet those objectives that I mentioned. The most common ones are the aphid banker plants for rearing large amounts of the Phidias colmani, but there's others, including Aureus, which is also known as minute pirate bug and an effective predator of adult thrips and a generalist feeder on top of that. But there's other research being done by Dr. Lance Osborne, University of Florida, on some banker plants for spider mite control as well. So this is an area that's it's increasing in interest, and I think it's going to help push the needle towards biocontrols that makes it more effective and more affordable. A lot of biological controls need pollen as a part of their diet in order for them to be healthy and reproduce rapidly in the greenhouse. So the institution of the concept of companion plants has been a big help, not only producing pollen, but protein sources. Also, particularly in outdoor applications or growers that have open side greenhouses, we're attracting syrphid fly and other aphid predators into our nurseries, into our greenhouses, and you get some biocontrol for free that way. Last but not least, probably the most exciting breakthroughs has been in terms of breeding systems. Some of these are in sachets. I'll describe those in a second. Others are in-house breeding systems so that we can move the insectaria, if it will, into your greenhouse and produce those biological controls in-house, making it less expensive and less subject to the shipping issues that you have from shipping overseas. In terms of the sachets, these are miniature breeding systems. They're small packets that are water repellent. And inside those packets, there is bran. Bran serves as the food for bran mites, and the bran mites serve as the prey for the Amblysia species predator mites that are going to be instituted in the grower's operation. So instead of releasing broadcast applications of Amblysia mites every week, these sachets last 4 to 6 weeks if they're installed properly in the greenhouse and produce more than 1,000 mites in most cases over that life chain. And then we're going to talk also about a breeding system for a theta here in just a minute, and I'll get into more detail that in a second. Here's the picture. These are what we use on our cherry-oat aphids, which are, they attack only cereal crops and monocots. So they can be used to create a population of aphids in the greenhouse that will serve as the launching pad for Aphidius colmani without fear of them spreading to our broadleaf annuals and so forth in the greenhouse. You can see these plants are heavily infested with them. They're kept in a screened-in area, and until the right time when Aphidius colmani is released into there, and when a high level of parasitizing is taking place, they'll then be released into the greenhouse. Here's a picture from Michael's greenhouses. The plant on the right is one that was recently installed there. The one on the left looks like it's a couple of weeks old, but they probably left it up because it was still producing predators out of it. And so it's very easy to put them on your hanging basket line or put them on a bench and have these factories for Aphidius colmani. One of the challenges with biocontrol in spring greenhouses is that aphids, once the weather gets warm, aphids reproduce more rapidly than the parasitoids. So you can go to the poor farm trying to release enough Aphidius colmani to keep up with a small species of aphids like green peach aphid. And the banker plants allow you to produce so many on site economically that we bend that cost curve back the other way. I mentioned companion plants. These are source of pollen. My favorite is alyssum. You see some other examples in there. Cosmos, some of the dwarf cosmos, and the African marigold with the large flower heads also work quite well for that purpose. You see lantana in this picture. I'm not a fan of lantana only because they attract whiteflies and thrips, and I don't want to cause more trouble than I'm fixing there. But alyssum, or if you'll prefer the lobularia to putting up in hanging baskets, are excellent sources. The alyssum in particular is very inexpensive to maintain. This is a picture of a sachet that's actually in use in propagation. We really encourage beginning biocontrols in propagation, so they're leaving the propagator with predator mite populations on them. You can't really see from this picture, but it's mounted on a stick. You can purchase them on sticks so they can be applied in the propagation trays. You want to keep them near the surface of the soil, and that particular iteration of the sachets allows that to happen. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time before we get into the pesticides talking about a breeder system for the rove beetle. Now, rove beetle has a couple of different names. The trade name is staffline, but they go by Atheta coriaria and Delosia. And so I wanted you to see all those names because depending on who's talking about it, they might call it any of those names. These are voracious feeders of soil-borne pests. I tell growers that they're hungrier than your teenage son. They particularly go after the immature stages of fungus gnats and shore flies and the pupal and prepupal stage of thrips that occurs on the surface of the soil. So those are really important pests to greenhouse growers. The adults are very small beetles. They fly. They're very mobile. In fact, they follow their strong sense of smell to be attracted to their prey. We have seen them cross barriers in closed greenhouses to get to the other side in order to pursue their prey. So they're extremely mobile. This breeder bucket system is very inexpensive. In fact, it costs less than $80 for a system that will give you 2 months or more of a high level of rove beetles for less than $80. This is a picture of the adult Atheta going after fungus gnat larvae. So the system is very simple, and it comes with a bucket that's been specifically designed for this purpose. And it comes with the media that you need, and you just need to add 500 milliliters of water to it in the bucket. The next step is to add the Atheta under the trade name staff line here. This 1 liter tube of Atheta provides 500 rogue beetles to get the colony started, and then just 2 teaspoons of the food that's required. From there, it's really quite simple. The Atheta are quite rugged, so we take that bucket, we turn it over a couple of times to thoroughly mix the Atheta and the food throughout the bucket. And then Atheta like to rear and breed in areas in the greenhouse that are cooler and darker. So we'll often put these underneath benches out of the way, just someplace that can be reached from the aisle for the occasional addition of water and feed to them. There's a very easy to follow program of how much food and water is added on a weekly basis, and this is something, since we're not dealing with a pesticide, anybody can do it. So your high school help that shows up after school can maintain these for you. And as you can see, it doesn't take very much to have a raging population of Atheta going to work for you in your greenhouses. I'm going to move on now. We're going to talk a little bit about silicon. You know, it's been around, this discussion has been going on for decades or more in greenhouse circles, but it seems to have had a renaissance here in recent years, and there's some really good new research, I think, that is behind that. There are multiple plant health benefits from plants that do accumulate silicon. Some of them improved stem caliper and strength, thicker stems, reduction in plant stress. We'll talk about the ways that works here in just a minute. And also, particularly foliar applications lead to a thicker leaf cuticle. This thicker cuticle is very helpful in repelling certain insect and disease problems. In terms of disease, we know that a thicker cuticle makes it harder for powdery mildew to punch a hole in the cuticle and put its feeding tube down into the leaf. And in several cases, insects and mites are either find it more difficult to feed, or their ovipositing or their egg-laying activities are disrupted by this thicker cuticle. We also are aware of SAR response, a systemic acquired resistance, and that is when an outside force, an outside compound on that plant causes the plant's natural defenses to be stimulated and make them more effective, and that is drench applications of silicon are capable of doing that for many plants. So the first thing I want to point out is that not all plants are silicon accumulators, and that research is ongoing. What I can encourage you with, it seems that there are cases where even plants that are not silicon accumulators still benefit from foliar applications of silicon, and that research will continue to get fleshed out over the next several years. There are some very good studies that were done by USDA and also by Dr. Neil Mattson at Cornell that have shown decreased incidence of powdery mildew in cucumbers, zinnias, sunflowers, phlox, and even some other crops. Very interesting is these silicon applications have been shown to decrease the reproductive capacity of aphids. And also, I know from other research at UC Davis, we know that the ovipositing of leaf miners and thrips is also inhibited by a thicker cuticle that's induced by foliar applications of silicon. There's been also some cases where plant stress has been reduced by silicon, and one of those is increasing the soluble salt tolerance in Guinean patients. So you can see why we're paying attention to this. It's pretty exciting. A couple of things we want to point out. I think we mentioned most of this. I think we'll go ahead and skip this. We covered most of this information here. For the most part, our growers are making foliar applications of silicon, but there are certain benefits, including the SIR response, that are unique to the drench applications of silicon. Sil Matrix is, to my knowledge, is the first silicon containing product that is labeled as an EPA pesticide for both insect and disease control. Think of it as a preventative. It's something that's going to be much more effective if it's applied before the pests are on the scene. In terms of insects, the initial label includes aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies. As I mentioned before, we are well aware of data that indicates leaf miner and thrips activity as well. For foliar diseases, you can see both detritus and powdery mildew on the list, so it can quickly become a good friend to greenhouse growers. It has a very broad label that allows it to be used on vegetables or ornamentals. It can be used in greenhouses or outdoor nurseries, so very versatile in that regard. Unlike other products where we try with traditional chemistry, we like to go on a see and treat basis, so we're not making applications until we have our scouting indicates we have a problem. The best way to use silicon is to make regular applications. You'll get the maximum benefit from its protectant activities. And surfactants are very important in getting even spreading, even distribution. This is not a systemic product, so only those cells that are coated with the silicon from the foliar sprays will get the benefits from it. So a high-quality organosilicon surfactant such as capsule, which improves, breaks down surface tension and improves spreading, can be very beneficial. I do have some bloom safety issues. We need to get more information on this, but this sounds like to me, at least initially, is a product that is used from the seedling stage up until you're getting close to final sale, and then you'll need to migrate to something else until we get a better handle on the bloom damage that this can cause. As you can see, with a 4-hour REI and it's OMRI listed, it should be a good fit in most growing operations. I briefly mentioned Aston earlier as really a rising star. One thing we really want to point out is that botrytis is very capable of developing resistance to fungicides. In fact, a research project by Dr. Jim Faust at Clemson University with some of his grad students, they were testing strains of botrytis coming out of strawberry fields for resistance, and they found some of those strains were resistant to the 7 major modes of action. So that's a warning to greenhouse growers that we want to be really careful about rotating. And GGS Pro recommends at least 3 different modes of action of botryticide to be in your spring program. Aston is a mode of action 7, and you'll find that's a relatively crowded field, so we will mention this as we go through this morning. Aston is unique in that this particular mode of action 7 fungicide has a unique binding site in botrytis, and for that reason it has not shown any cross resistance to the other mode of action 7 fungicides to date. Broadform is a new product that is a combination of 2 fungicides, and it's coming into a crowded field. You'll see that it has mode of action 7 and 11. 11 is your strobilurons. Strobilurons are noted for their preventative control. They're not eradicants, but they're preventative, and they tend to have a very broad spectrum of control and good plant safety. And that's the case with Broadform as well. The mode of action 7 fungicide is added to give a quick knockdown, and that the strobilurons lack. The other products in this field that you might be aware of, we mentioned Mural already. Pageant and Orchestra from BASF also have the same combination of mode of action. So we're not going to rotate between those fungicides. Trifloxystrobin is the strobiluron. You may be familiar with that active ingredient name. It is the active ingredient in Compass, which has been around for quite a while, and is a very effective strobiluron. We'll talk about some of the unique characteristics of that in a minute. When you take a look at the diseases that are controlled, you can see there's some very important diseases in there, including botrytis and powdery mildew, rhizoctonia, including aerial rhizoctonia. So a lot of really important diseases. I do want to point out that at this point, Broadform is only labeled as a foliar spray. There is potential for a drench label sometime in the future. This product has shown to have excellent results against botrytis in trials, but bear in mind that we're in a crowded field with the other mode of action 7 products, so we're going to make sure that we follow all the resistance management instructions on the label so we're rotating properly. It has a very broad label in terms of where you can use it on ornamentals only, but it can be used in interior scapes, nurseries, greenhouses, pretty much anywhere you'd like to apply it. There are some non-bearing fruit trees and nut trees on the label as well. It has two different ways that it distributes itself through the plant. One is translaminar activity. That is the mode of action 7 fungicide. A translaminar product is one that if you spray it on the top of the leaf over the period of several hours to several days, it will migrate through that leaf and get to the lower leaf surface. It will not move from a treated part of the plant to an untreated part of the plant from right to left, and it doesn't move up into new tissue, but it does increase our spray coverage, and that's a very nice trait. It does have vapor movement also. That goes back to the Compass product that is in it. What the vapor activity means is that for the first couple of times that the foliage gets wet up after it's applied, it turns to a vapor and it creeps along with the waxy cuticle of the leaf, and for a period of time will continue to protect new foliage as that emerges from the growing tip. You can see the reapplication intervals are 7 to 14 days. That it would be something in common with Pageant, but a little bit shorter than Mural. Mural has an attribute called acropetal movement, which means that it actually gets into the vascular system of the plant and moves up into new foliage for a period of time. So Mural's reapplication intervals are stretched out a little bit further. Like all of your other strobilurons, we do not recommend surfactants with it. In fact, products such as capsule can even cause a phytotoxicity when combined with them. The fact that they move so well on their own takes some of the sting out of that. And unfortunately, Broadform's initial label does not allow for fogging. We've spoken to the technical people at Bayer, and they assured us they'll pursue this. I think the vapor activity of this product makes it ideal for fogging, so we will see if a fogging label comes out in the near future. EcoSwing is a brand new product. It's a botanical extract, and Swinglia actually is a type of citrus, and this is an extract from that plant. Whenever you see a P in the mode of action code, it alerts you that this product exhibits systemic acquired resistance. And we mentioned that briefly before, and that is when this product is sprayed onto the plant, it stimulates the plant's natural defenses, and we'll talk about that in detail here in just a second. This is the list of diseases that EcoSwing controls is relatively short for the average greenhouse grower. Botrytis and powdery mildew are the two that are going to get your attention. But it's shown very well in the trials and a unique new compound with a brand new mode of action. So we're going to encourage growers to try to add this into their control programs. The way that it works, it actually stimulates the plant upon attack or upon a puncture wound in a leaf to produce some oxidative compounds, including hydrogen peroxide, that actually serve as to form a ring around the infection site and try to wall off that pathogen. Here's a picture that was provided to us by Gowan, and you can see that this is just a regular table grape that's been punctured. If you look over to the far right, about 3 or 4 days after the treatment, you can see these dark purple rings forming around the puncture area, and these are these oxidative compounds that are produced in order to try to wall off and keep that fungus walled off into that area where the puncture wound occurred. So a very unique mode of action. There's really nothing else like that in the products that we currently have. So it's labeled for edible and ornamental greenhouses. It can be used in interior scapes, greenhouses, and outdoors. It is an EC formulation that made us wonder about plant safety, but all of the trials to date on both plant material and the open blooms has been perfectly fine. It doesn't leave any residue behind. It's compatible with your biocontrol programs. And again, a 4-hour REI and OMRI listed for those of you seeking organic certification. Regime I'm going to mention briefly. This is another unique mode of action. This is actually, it's actually a seed storage protein called BLAD. It's isolated from germinating sweet lupin seeds, and it is a powdery mildew and botrytis product as well. We'll talk about this more in the future. The initial label was faulty in my view. It listed only 12 ornamentals on the label. And the way the label is written, they're the only 12 ornamental crops you can use it on. So I do think the label will need to be expanded. But briefly, the mode of action, it coats spores, and it actually it alters the configuration of the chitin, and within 20 to 30 minutes, it actually causes it to form so much that the spores rupture and the contents pour out. So it is a unique mode of action. I think you'll hear more about it, but right now the label's so limited, I don't see wide acceptance at this time. Optigo, this is going to be a competitor to your root shield products. It contains 2 uniquely different strains of trichoderma than you will find in the root shield products. This has been on the market in Europe for some time. This is the first registration of it in the U.S. Very much like root shield, it works by colonizing the root zone. It competes for the root exudates with the pathogens. There also is some type of parasitism, especially on Rhizoctonia, that takes place. And CPRO tells us there's a wide range of environmental and soil types that this product will prosper in. Again, we don't have any real-world data on it, so we're going to withhold judgment until we get to see some of that data. It is very broad spectrum. The major diseases on the label are Pythium, Phytophthora, and Rhizoctonia. There's a few others that are on the label as well. It'll be labeled for all types of plants, herbs, vegetables, and ornamentals, both in indoor and outdoor applications. And as you can imagine, excellent crop safety for this. What really caught our attention is the fact that you can store Optigo for 15 months at room temperature, which would be an advantage over the root shield products in that regard. It is expected to get an OMRI listing. It has not been approved yet. And again, you have a 4-hour REI, and it's a 0-day PHI if you're using it to produce edible crops. So it's interesting to me that so many of the new products now have short REIs, and many of them are OMRI listed as well. I think that's the trend that wide acceptance of some of the softer microbial products taking hold in our industry, and that's a good thing. Here's one more for you. Prefense is a unique product. It's really a fusarium specialist. It's based on a Streptomyces, and it was really picked up by the folks at Bioworks, because even though the root shield products are labeled for fusarium, they know that under high fusarium pressure, those products don't hold up quite as well as they like. So they picked up Prefense in order to have something that growers that are producing crops that are highly susceptible to fusarium, they can tank mix this with their root shield to increase the fusarium control. I just included this slide from Ann Chase. It just shows some of the crops that we grow that are particularly susceptible to fusarium. Fusarium is a vascular wilt. It can sometimes take weeks to months to actually show the symptoms. And because of that, I think it's underdiagnosed by growers. They're having issues they attribute to other problems that are actually caused by fusarium. There's some other plant responses going on. In fact, even healthy plants treated with Prefense will show increases in yields. So something else is happening in terms of stimulating the plant's natural processes that are going on there. It does have multiple modes of action. We like that whenever we can get it, because it's much more likely for the organisms to develop resistance. So a compound that has multiple modes of action. You can see the reapplication interval every 3 to 6 weeks. Because this product is very perishable once it is opened, it's important not to mix up any more than you're going to need to use right away. And so there's an advantage, the fact it comes in multiple size small packets, so that you can very precisely mix up how much you need for the job at hand. Excellent BCA and B compatibility, and again, another 4-hour REI product that is relisted. Let's switch over and talk about technology just for a minute here. The Dram Turbo Hybrid is a very interesting new fogger. It runs on 110 electricity. I think the best fit for this is growers that typically don't fog more than 1 or 2 greenhouses or one or two sections of a gutter connect house at a time. If you are consistently doing larger fogging jobs than that, there's some great technology from Dram that we'd love to talk to you about. This product here is capable of producing a dry fog, and we really like that aspect of it. We're only talking about a liter, a half a liter to 1 liter per 1,000 square feet. So you think about your spring greenhouse when you're full bloom here. It's the last week of April and you're expecting to start shipping out, and you get a weather forecast for a week of rain and fog and slop. And the last thing you want to do is go out and put 20 or 30 gallons of water in your 30 by 96 greenhouse to apply the fungicide. And this type of low volume equipment allows you to put the fungicide on the site with very little water. You'll see some advertising for this. It says you can fog 25 to 30 feet out. With the nozzle size that we think is most effective, we believe 15 to 20 feet is the ideal coverage distance, which is still quite good. For your average 30 by 96 greenhouse, you can do the whole house from the center walk. If you're doing a gutter connect bay, again, up to 30 or 32 feet wide, you can still fog the whole that whole section from the center walkway. Nutrifog is used as the carrier. It's glycerin based, so it doesn't have any of the human safety issues or the plant safety issues of VK1 and VK2. This unit doesn't produce any heat, so your microbial pesticides and some of your heat sensitive products such as Decree can be used through there without any issues. As I mentioned, we're talking about a half to 1 liter of water per 1,000 square feet, so the 5-liter tank, and you can pretty much do two freestanding houses. The particle sizes, if you're familiar with the other Dram equipment, is going to be similar to the pulse fog and the cold fogger. The auto fog produces the smaller particle size down to 10 microns, so where we are able to use that technology, we prefer it. When this machine first came out, there was a lot of it was difficult to get reliable rates for how to help growers to dilute their chemicals for it. Through some trial and error, some trial partners, we've honed in on the rates there. We're using rates that are very similar to the Dram cold fogger. And anyone that purchased a Dram fogger through Griffin, we produce a spreadsheet for you based on the square footage of your greenhouses that tells you how much water and how much chemical. Again, that would apply to all the Dram foggers. Here's another unit. This is on the other end of the technology spectrum. This is a small pump-up hand sprayer, foamer, I should say. And we know we really appreciate the value of foaming when it comes to sanitation. It's very important that all your sanitizers have as much contact time as possible. You'll find the efficacy goes up in every case when your contact time goes up. And by applying these products in a foam, it allows them to stay in wet contact with the pathogen and the surface we're trying to treat longer, thereby improving our control. You also know how difficult it is to get sanitizers to adhere to vertical surfaces such as sidewalls and poles and so forth in your greenhouse, and the foam allows for that as well. And something I didn't mention is it allows you to see where you foam, so you know you haven't skipped any areas as well. This unit's going to be less than $200, and I think probably every greenhouse is going to want to have one for those smaller sanitation jobs. If you're foaming large acreage, then we certainly have bigger and better machines for that type of work. Fortress is a new herbicide, and you'll see that there's really not a lot new going on in herbicides, especially since Marengo was introduced. So where we're seeing improvements in efficacy is by either changing the formulation or making different combinations of active ingredients to improve control and improve plant safety. And Fortress is an excellent example of that. It's going to be labeled for all of your outdoor applications, both nursery container grown stock as well as field grown. There's two different active ingredients in there. One is the same that's in Dimension, which is a very good pre-emergent herbicide for grassy weeds, and then Gallery, which is the same for broadleaf weeds. And you'll see some advantages over this formulation as we go through. Rather than being liquids like Dimension and Gallery, this is a granular formulation, and OHP uses the new patented Verge technology. One of the big issues with granular applications of herbicides is the dust that comes off of it, not only being a hazard to the applicators, but also making it more likely that the active ingredients will drift off-site. And the Verge technology granules really helps with that. It also makes it very easy to spread it uniformly. And here's just a quick picture of what that looks like. And one of the improvements by switching from liquid formulations of those herbicides to a granular, the list of plants that are damaged by those herbicides shrinks quite a bit. So as you get a chance to take a look at the new Fortress label, you'll find a much smaller list of plant products that it cannot be applied over the top of because of the improved plant safety. A couple of really tough weeds are really excelled at by Fortress, including crabgrass, bittercress, and spurge. This is a quick list here. There's nearly 50 broadleaf weeds and almost 20 grassy weeds that Fortress controls. So for most of us, we certainly do want you to rotate modes of action from year to year, but Fortress is going to really cut a wide swath through our weed problems. The OHP says it's good for 3 months or more. I can tell you in the rainy east that 3 months is as good as you're going to get out of that, or most other herbicides for that matter. Some growers in more arid parts of the country are getting longer control. One of the unique things about it with the increased interest in ornamental grasses has been difficult to find pre-emergent herbicides that control grassy weeds that are safe over it, and Fortress can be used on your most common ornamental grasses that we use in the Northeast. I did include this note here that those products, those plant products on the label shown as safe were tested at 4 times the label rate. That is not an invitation to increase the rate, but it does let you know that there's a good margin of plant safety out there with this product. Just real quickly, I want a couple of things, and a lot of this will apply to other pre-emergent herbicides as well. We know that the way these products work is that they need to become moist and they form a chemical barrier, chemical bond to the top layer of soil. So it's really important if let's say you're going to want to treat your garden mum field with Fortress or Barricade or one of the other good pre-emergent herbicides, we always encourage growers to irrigate them a couple times overhead before you apply the pre-emergent herbicide. Because if the soil has not settled yet, as it begins to settle, you get cracks in that chemical barrier where weeds can come up through. So that's really important. And it does need water to be activated. That does vary a little bit by the different pre-emergents. Fortress really would like to have the equivalent of a ½ inch irrigation within the first 2 days that it's out in the field. And again, that's to get that chemical barrier going before the product starts to dissipate into the air or blown off the top of the pod, something like that. Picana is another OHP product. I know some of you were concerned about OHP when Bayer pulled back some of their major active ingredients from them. OHP is doing fine. They have a long string. We'll talk about some new products coming out also from OHP. They're partnered with new partners and have a lot of great new insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides coming down the pike. This particular product is a combination of botanical oil, in this case canola, and natural pyrethrins. The entomologist for OHP pointed out that they think there's an advantage to the fact that there's 6 different natural pyrethrins in there. And the reason is that we know that natural pyrethrins, just like synthetic pyrethrins, have a lot of resistance to them from the major pests that we like to use them on. and they feel that having 6 different pyrethrins in there will help to circumvent some of those resistance issues. It's a very broad spectrum product. The oil portion of it will really help with mealybugs, spider mites, immature stages of whiteflies, while the natural pyrethrin will be a quick knockdown for beetles and caterpillars and other pests as well. So it's very broad spectrum, and between the two of them, they work on multiple life stages of the insect and mite pests that are out there. It has a very broad label in terms of ornamentals, herbs, which is always a big thing, and vegetables, whether they're grown in greenhouses or in outdoor nurseries as well. You'll see a note here that under high pest pressure, you can apply it every 3 days. We're gonna that's on the label. We're gonna encourage you not to do that. There is some leftover paraffin type substances from oil treatments that if multiple applications are made in less than a weekly interval, in our opinion, you increase the risk of phytotoxicity. So we're going to encourage you to stick with us. If you need some advice on what else to spray, that 7 days should really be the minimum reapplication interval. Now, I made note that there's no residual effects on BCAs. The unfortunate thing is that all oils and all pyrethrins, whether they're natural or synthetic, do kill BCAs on contact. So in order to use this in a BCA program, you either would need to be spot spraying a particular hot spot, or you're spraying this product and then we'll be able to quickly, in a few days later, be able to get in there and reintroduce the biocontrols again. So in that regard, it is compatible with IPM programs, but it's not a spray you can make over the top of the entire BCA population, or you'd inflict heavy damage. Like all oils, we know that the key to plant safety is to have good drying conditions. So we like to apply oil-containing insecticides in the morning hours on a day when we're going to be ventilating, either natural ventilation or fans. You'll see that I've noticed after an oil application and a heavy canopy of foliage where the leaves are overlapped, if you lift up those leaves where it was not able to dry, you'll see black etching that outlines the leaf that was on top of the other one there. So it really points out the fact that we want to have good drying conditions. So we're watching humidity more than the temperature, honestly. There were some trials done at the University of Maryland over 90 degrees, and the oil was still safe so long as the humidity was low enough that the product dried quickly. Because of the mode of action, the oil acts as a suffocant. It's not eligible for any type of fogging application. And again, another OMRI-listed compound to add to your list. Ventigra, this product is not yet registered in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, I think, reviews new pesticides 3 times a year, so I don't think that there's any concern about it being registered there. It just has not come up yet, but it should be imminent. And it is a feeding blocker, which means that it interferes with what happens is that the mouth parts of these various insects are paralyzed. They feel like they're not getting any more sustenance, so they pull their feeding tube out, and they're unable to reinsert them. And it's important to know that, because that means that you'll have several days before you actually see the insect die. And so in terms of scouting, we don't want growers to run out and evaluate control the next morning after a Ventigra spray, but wait a few days. The mode of action is similar to some of the other products you might be familiar with. Endeavor is 9B. So that's pretty close. We probably will not rotate between Endeavor and Ventigra, but it's different from Aria, which is mode of action 28, which is another type of feeding blocker. So we do think this will fit in a rotational program, and a lot of good uses there. Will be able to use in interior scapes, greenhouses, and outdoor nurseries as well. Like the other feeding blockers, since it takes a while for insect death to occur, we like to use it preventatively, although we have used similar products, come from behind. If you're a little patient, you can still do a good job with that. There are many tank mix cautions on the label, so we would direct you to that portion of the label. We do know that surfactants such as capsule are recommended and will increase the control. Ventigra rains fast within an hour after it's sprayed. I know that some of you think that you can make it rain by going outside and spraying your mum crop. And for those of you that can do that, the fact that it's rain fast in an hour is a really nice benefit. It is good pollinator and BCA safety. There is a note on the label that there is a short-term behavior change to bees that are sprayed overhead with this product, but it doesn't have any impact on the final colony. Obviously, we're going to encourage you never to spray any insecticides over a field where there's bees actively foraging. We can help you with bee safety strategies. A couple of label changes that I thought were significant. A lot of you are big fans of Pageant Intrinsic as a broad spectrum fungicide in your spring greenhouse, and we are too. There are 3 supplemental labels now that will allow for various edible crops, including cucurbits, leafy greens, and fruiting vegetables to be treated with Pageant in the greenhouse, not only as vegetable transplants, but also all the way on to harvest. That's a really nice benefit. For those of you that grow basil transplants for resale, and you know the curse of downy mildew of basil, Segovus, which I mentioned is the most effective downy mildew product on the market, has a supplemental label for basil transplants for resale. Sand mite is an insecticide that has been around for a long time, tried and true as a miticide, also as a whitefly product. The formulation has changed. In fact, in the next week or so, Griffin will be starting to sell the SC formulation. So rather than the water-soluble packets, which have not been very popular over the years, it now is an SC formulation, so it's a water-based flowable. Some of the other changes have gone from a warning to a caution label, so the signal word has been reduced. They've also added some other pests. There's several species of aphids, broad mites, and leafhoppers have been added. I would point out a caution. We have known for years that sand mite kills broad mites, but since it is not a translaminar product, it is often difficult to get the sand mite in contact with the broad mites, which are very reclusive, and they get tucked down into the growing tips, making it difficult to get at them. It also has had some vegetable crops added to the label with greenhouse tomatoes and cucumbers, so another product to add to that list. Some of you are familiar with the fungicide called Emblem. Emblem has the active ingredient fludeoxonil, which is the same as Medallion. Emblem has some distinctly different characteristics in that it is a liquid rather than a powder, and it does have many vegetables and herbs on the label. New Farm, for reasons I'm not quite sure why, have changed the name to Spirato GHN. So in our literature going forward, if you order it from us, you'll be getting Spirato. So the product has not changed, the label has not changed, just the name has. And many of you are also familiar with Hachi Hachi. When the initial formulation was released, it was an EC, and it was very phytotoxic. In fact, we very quickly stopped selling it after its release. However, it's back and it's new and improved in a SC formulation, a water-based flowable, and the number of crops that it damages is much lower than it was before. It recently received an outdoor application, and this is good news for those growers that are struggling with flea beetles. Hachi Hachi is very effective against flea beetles and can now be used on hydrangeas and other crops, woody ornamentals, semi-woodies outside that are troubled by flea beetles. A couple of label changes that have not occurred yet, but they're on their way through EPA, and we have pretty good confidence that they will be coming out. Segway, which we feel is the best Pythium control product on the market right now for greenhouse growers, expects to add peppers, tomatoes, and herbs either the first or second quarter this year. That'll be, especially for our herb growers, will really be a breakthrough. And Cora is a microbial insecticide that is very effective against whiteflies, thrips, and a number of other pests. One of our challenges with it is has a tendency to clog nozzles of sprayers and foggers. And you'll notice there's a decant procedure on the label. There is a new formulation that is micromilled to a smaller size, which we are hoping will reduce or eliminate those clogging issues and allow us to recommend Ancora more freely going forward. Syngenta is working on a drench label for Endeavor. It's really important to point out that you can't start drenching Endeavor until we get that label in our hands, but this would provide systemic control of aphids and whiteflies taken up through the plant, something we've been asking Syngenta for quite a while. CPRO is about to update the Rycar label. If you're not familiar with Rycar, it's one of the feeding blockers out there. It's highly effective against aphids. On whiteflies, we have found it to be one of the best products, even for the cubi type whitefly. And recently, research from Dr. Raymond Cloyd at Kansas State University has shown that if you use the higher rate for mealybugs, that 3 applications a week apart gave 100% control of citrus mealybugs in his trials, which is very hard to achieve. And he also found, by the way, that Altus used at the 14 ounce per 100 gallon rate in the same pattern, 3 applications a week apart gave 100% control. Some upcoming products, and I'll stop for questions after this. We hope available the second quarter of this year. When you see mode of action 28, the only other product currently on the market with that mode of action is Mainspring, which, as you know, is a very successful insecticide with great plant safety. There's going to be some competition in that field. a product called Sarissa, which will only be labeled for outdoor crops, coming up from OHP. And then Prodia is going to be a combination of that same active ingredient with flunicimid that will be used for greenhouse crops. The significance of flunicimid, that's the active ingredient from Aria. And if there is a weakness to mainspring, is that foliar sprays do not control aphids very well. By adding flunicimid, they will add that aphid control to the Prodia product. All these products will be applied by foliar sprays only. You might know that mainspring is also drenchable. And they display acropetal movement. I mentioned that briefly earlier. What that means is that when it's sprayed onto the tissue, it enters the vascular system and moves up into new growth for a period of time to extend the length of control. I think I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions that have come in that I can try to answer for you.
Thank you, Rick. So we have some few minutes for questions. My colleague Jason is going to get the questions from you and repeat the question to Rick.
Any questions? No questions.
No questions.
Okay.
You did too good of a job.
I've got a few more slides, or if you'd like me to stop so you stay on time, whatever you say.
Okay, how many slides?
I just have three slides. I could stop a quarter up.
Yeah, okay, I think you can do that.
Okay.
Of course, there are no questions.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Very good. We'll jump right in here. There's a new product from BASF called Velifer. Apparently, they're running out of names for new insecticides at BASF. All the new ones begin with the letter V. This is Bavaria bassiana. You may recognize that as the active ingredient that's in Botanigard and Bioceres. So that's expected sometime this year. They think very highly of it, think it will have excellent activity. So we'll see as that product comes out. So I wanted to be aware of that. We did kind of rush through the information on SARs. I wanted just to circle back to that for a minute. Any type of external factor in a plant that causes it to stimulate the plant natural defense is to be considered an SAR. Sometimes that is an insect or pathogen attacking the plant. Sometimes it's an activator that we apply, such as a fungicide. And there are some examples of products that we sell that do exhibit this type of activity. Aludin phosphite, phosphonate, and they stimulate a plant's natural defenses against Phytophthora and downy mildews. They also stimulate plant root systems, so they're multi-purpose in that way. Regalia, PTO, now called Regalia CG, is actually an extract from the giant knotweed that has good activity against powdery and downy mildews, as well as some bacterial leaf spots. EcoSwing is one that we mentioned today. That's the Pointlea extract that is effective against botrytis and powdery mildew. Paraclostrobin is the active ingredient in common between Pageant, Empress, and Orchestra. Paraclostrobin has been shown to have plant health benefits, including increased cold tolerance, drought tolerance, and also enhancing rooting on unrooted cuttings. And then we also mentioned silicon today, drench applications of silicon displaying SAR responses. I think I'll stop there to keep you on track, but I appreciate your attention and have a safe trip home after your conference.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. Thank you. So as we change over to the next presentation, maybe you can take 5 minutes to stretch, and then we get to the next presentation. No, that's mine. Yeah. No, you have an automatic.